I pretended to support my son's marriage while secretly proving his wife was a gold digger. My youngest son came home last Christmas with this woman who seemed too perfect, too interested in our family's financial situation, and way too eager to please everyone around the dinner table. She kept asking pointed questions about our vacation home, the cars in the driveway, and even complimented the expensive artwork hanging in our living room with an unusual level of knowledge about their estimated values. Something felt off from the very beginning, but my son was absolutely smitten and couldn't see past her charming smile and carefully crafted responses to every question we asked. The relationship moved incredibly fast, and within 3 months they were engaged, which sent red flags shooting up in my mind like fireworks on the 4th of July. She insisted on having the wedding at an expensive venue, wanted a honeymoon in Europe, and kept making comments about how wonderful it would be to have financial security in a marriage. My son, who had always been somewhat naive when it came to relationships, seemed completely oblivious to these obvious warning signs that were practically screaming at anyone who bothered to pay attention to the subtle manipulation tactics she was employing. I decided to play along and be the supportive father, while secretly conducting my own investigation into her background and true intentions behind this whirlwind romance. During family dinners, I would casually mention different aspects of our financial situation, sometimes exaggerating our wealth and other times downplaying it, just to see how her behavior and attitude would change accordingly throughout the evening. When I talked about potential business losses or economic downturns, she would become noticeably less affectionate toward my son and more distant during conversations, almost as if she was calculating whether the relationship was still worth her time and energy. The most telling moment came when I deliberately mentioned that we were considering selling some of our properties due to market conditions and unexpected expenses that had come up recently. Her entire demeanor shifted within seconds, and she started asking my son privately about his inheritance prospects and whether our family had any trusts or long-term financial planning in place for the future. She even went so far as to suggest that maybe they should postpone the wedding until things became more financially stable, which was completely contrary to her previous enthusiasm about planning an elaborate ceremony and expensive reception. I started documenting these conversations and her reactions, keeping detailed notes about her behavior patterns and the specific things she said when she thought nobody was paying close attention to her words. My wife initially thought I was being paranoid and overprotective, but she eventually started noticing the same inconsistencies in this woman's story and behavior that had been bothering me from the very beginning of their relationship. The way she would light up when discussing expensive purchases, but become withdrawn when conversations turned to budgeting or financial responsibility, was particularly concerning to both of us. The breakthrough came when I hired a private investigator to look into her background, and what we discovered was absolutely shocking and far worse than I had originally suspected could be possible. She had been married twice before, both times to men from wealthy families, and both marriages had ended in expensive divorces where she had walked away with significant financial settlements and valuable assets. The pattern was eerily similar to what she was attempting with my son, right down to the same timeline and manipulation tactics that she had apparently perfected through years of practice and refinement. But the real twist came when the investigator discovered that she was still technically married to her second husband, making her engagement to my son completely fraudulent and potentially illegal under state law. The divorce proceedings had never been finalized due to some legal complications that she had apparently been deliberately avoiding, and she had been living as a single woman for over a year, while still being legally bound to another man who had no idea where she was or what she was doing with her life. This revelation changed everything about how I viewed her motivations and the level of deception she was willing to engage in to achieve her goals. Armed with this information, I had to decide whether to confront her directly or find a more strategic way to expose her true nature to my son without seeming like the villain in the situation. I chose to arrange a family gathering where I invited some close friends who happened to know her previous husbands, without telling anyone about the connections or what I had discovered through my investigation into her background. The plan was to create a situation where her lies would naturally unravel, without me having to be the one delivering the devastating news to my son directly. The evening started normally enough, with casual conversation and typical family dynamics, but everything changed when one of our friends recognized her and started asking about her previous marriage and how her ex-husband was doing these days. The color drained from her face as she realized that her carefully constructed lies were about to unravel in front of everyone, including my son who was hearing about her previous marriages for the first time in their entire relationship. Her attempts to maintain composure while internally panicking were almost painful to watch, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to figure out how to salvage the situation. She tried to deflect and change the subject, but our friend continued talking about mutual acquaintances and shared memories from her previous life, completely unaware that he was inadvertently exposing her deception to everyone present. My son's confusion grew with each revelation, and I could see the pieces starting to fall into place in his mind as he began to understand the scope of what had been hidden from him throughout their entire relationship. The questions he started asking became more pointed and direct, and her answers became increasingly evasive and contradictory as the evening progressed. The situation escalated when she suddenly excused herself to go to the bathroom and never came back, leaving her purse, coat, and even her engagement ring on the kitchen counter. We found her car gone from the driveway, and she had apparently decided that fleeing was better than trying to explain away the mountain of lies that had just been exposed in front of everyone at the dinner table. The engagement ring she left behind turned out to be a fake, which was just another layer of deception in what was becoming an increasingly complex web of lies and manipulation that extended far beyond what any of us had initially imagined. My son was devastated, not just by the betrayal, but by the realization that he had been completely manipulated by someone he thought he loved and trusted with his future. The next few days were extremely difficult as he processed everything that had happened and tried to make sense of how he had missed so many obvious warning signs that seemed crystal clear in retrospect. He went through periods of anger, sadness, and confusion as he tried to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the reality of who she actually was and what she had been planning to do to our family. We later learned that she had done this same routine with at least 3 other men in different states, always targeting those from wealthy families and using the same emotional manipulation tactics to fast-track relationships toward marriage and financial gain. The private investigator helped us compile enough evidence to alert the authorities, and she was eventually arrested for fraud and bigamy when she tried to pull the same scheme on another unsuspecting victim in a neighboring state. The investigation revealed that she had been operating this scam for over 5 years, with varying degrees of success depending on how quickly her targets discovered her true intentions. The whole experience taught my son valuable lessons about being more cautious in relationships and paying attention to inconsistencies in people's stories, especially when someone seems too eager to rush important life decisions like marriage. He took some time to heal from the emotional trauma of being so thoroughly deceived by someone he had planned to spend his life with, but he eventually started dating again with a much more realistic and careful approach to getting to know potential partners. The experience made him more aware of red flags and manipulation tactics that he had previously been blind to due to his trusting nature and inexperience with serious relationships. Looking back, I realized that my investigation methods might have seemed extreme, but protecting my son from what could have been a financially and emotionally devastating marriage was worth the effort and resources involved in uncovering the truth. The situation could have ended very differently if I had simply accepted her at face value and ignored the instincts that were telling me something was fundamentally wrong with the entire relationship from the very beginning. The cost of the private investigator and the time spent documenting her behavior was minimal compared to what my son could have lost in a divorce settlement or the emotional damage that would have resulted from years of being manipulated by someone who never genuinely cared about him. The most surprising part of the whole ordeal was discovering that she had been involved in similar schemes across multiple states, suggesting a level of organization and premeditation that went far beyond what I had initially suspected when I first met her. She wasn't just an opportunistic gold digger looking for an easy target. She was essentially running a sophisticated con game that had been refined through years of practice and previous successful marriages that had netted her significant financial gains. The investigator found evidence of at least 6 different identities she had used over the years, each with carefully crafted backstories designed to appeal to different types of wealthy men. My son now jokes that he's grateful for having a paranoid father who doesn't trust easily, but at the time, he was angry with me for investigating his fiancée and felt like I had violated his privacy and independence. It took several months for him to fully understand that my actions had saved him from what could have been years of legal complications, financial loss, and emotional abuse from someone who had never genuinely cared about him as a person. The anger he initially felt toward me for interfering in his relationship eventually transformed into gratitude as he came to understand the full scope of what I had protected him from experiencing. The experience also strengthened our family relationships in unexpected ways, as we all learned to communicate more openly about concerns and suspicions rather than keeping quiet to avoid conflict or hurt feelings. My wife admitted that she had noticed several red flags, but hadn't wanted to seem judgmental or interfere with our son's happiness, which led to important conversations about the balance between support and protection in family dynamics. We established new guidelines for how to approach similar situations in the future, emphasizing the importance of honest communication even when it might be uncomfortable or potentially damaging to relationships. We never heard from her again after that night, but the private investigator kept us updated on her legal proceedings and eventual conviction on multiple charges related to fraud and bigamy across several states. She received a significant prison sentence and was ordered to pay restitution to her previous victims, though we doubt she has any assets left to actually compensate anyone for the damage she caused to their lives. The investigator mentioned that she had been living beyond her means and spending the money she obtained from her victims as quickly as she could extract it from them, leaving little in the way of recoverable assets for the court to distribute. The whole situation made me reflect on how parents can protect their adult children without overstepping boundaries or damaging relationships. And I think the key is gathering factual information rather than just expressing vague concerns or gut feelings. Having concrete evidence of her deception made it impossible for her to continue manipulating the situation, and it helped my son understand that my actions were motivated by love rather than control or disapproval of his choices. The documentation I had collected proved invaluable in helping him process what had happened and understand the patterns of manipulation that had been used against him throughout their relationship. Sometimes I wonder how many other families have fallen victim to similar schemes, and whether there are warning signs that communities could share to help protect vulnerable individuals from these types of predators. The sophistication of her operation suggested that she was part of a larger network, or at least had significant experience in targeting wealthy families across different geographic areas with carefully planned strategies. The investigator mentioned that this type of marriage fraud is becoming increasingly common, as people become more comfortable with online dating and fast-paced relationship development that makes it easier to hide past histories and true intentions. My son is now in a healthy relationship with someone who has her own career and financial independence, and he often tells me that the experience taught him to value authenticity and genuine compatibility over superficial charm and manipulation. The contrast between his current girlfriend and his former fiancée is striking, and it's clear that he learned valuable lessons about recognizing genuine versus manufactured emotions in relationships. His new girlfriend appreciates his cautious approach to commitment and understands why he takes time to really get to know someone before making major life decisions together. The entire ordeal lasted about 8 months from start to finish, but the impact on our family dynamics and my son's approach to relationships will probably last for years to come. While I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, I'm grateful that we were able to uncover the truth before any legal commitments were made that would have been much more difficult and expensive to undo later. The legal fees alone for divorcing someone involved in fraud and bigamy would have been astronomical, not to mention the emotional toll it would have taken on my son to discover her true nature after they were already married. In the end, trusting parental instincts and being willing to investigate suspicious behavior, even when it's uncomfortable or potentially controversial, proved to be the right decision for protecting my son from what could have been a devastating mistake. The temporary strain on our relationship was worth preventing the long-term consequences of allowing him to marry someone who was essentially a professional con artist, targeting our family's resources and emotional vulnerabilities. The investigation also revealed that she had been planning to convince my son to take out large loans against his future inheritance, which would have put our entire family at financial risk beyond just the immediate marriage relationship. The aftermath of the situation also led to some positive changes in how our family approaches financial discussions and planning for the future. We became more open about our assets and financial planning with our children, so they would be better prepared to recognize when someone was trying to manipulate them for financial gain. This transparency helped all of our children develop better awareness of their own financial situations and the responsibilities that come with family wealth, making them less vulnerable to similar schemes in the future. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized that the most important lesson was the value of taking time to really get to know someone before making life-changing commitments, regardless of how strong the initial attraction or emotional connection might seem. The pressure she put on my son to rush into marriage was probably the biggest red flag of all, and it's something that I'll always encourage my children to be wary of in future relationships. Taking the time to meet someone's family, friends, and colleagues from different periods of their life can reveal inconsistencies that might not be apparent in the early stages of a relationship when people are still presenting their best selves. The private investigator who helped us with the case mentioned that he had worked on similar cases before, and that the pattern of behavior we observed was typical of professional marriage fraudsters who target wealthy families. He recommended that we share our story with other families in similar situations, as awareness of these tactics can help prevent other victims from falling into the same traps. The investigator also suggested that anyone entering into a serious relationship with someone who seems unusually interested in financial matters should consider conducting at least basic background checks, especially if the relationship is moving unusually quickly toward marriage or other major commitments. The emotional recovery process for my son was gradual but steady, and he eventually came to see the experience as valuable education about human nature and the importance of being cautious with trust in relationships. He started reading books about psychology and manipulation tactics, which helped him understand how he had been targeted and what signs to watch for in future relationships. This knowledge made him more confident in his ability to recognize authentic connections versus manufactured attraction designed to achieve specific goals. The legal proceedings against her took almost 2 years to complete, and during that time, we learned even more about the extent of her criminal activities and the number of victims she had targeted over the years. The prosecutor's office mentioned that our case was instrumental in building a stronger case against her, as we had documented her behavior patterns more thoroughly than previous victims had been able to do. This documentation helped establish a clear pattern of premeditated fraud that made it easier to secure a conviction and appropriate sentencing that would prevent her from victimizing other families in the future.